Hello there, and welcome to Candidly. We are into hanging out and having candid conversations about all things life, with and after cancer. I'm your Thrivership hype woman and host, Carolyn Van. Have you heard of Wellspring? They offer programs and resources covering some of those emotional, physical, and practical challenges of cancer. I'm not so sure how I first learned about them. It might have just been through the heaps of information and piles of pamphlets that flood your way the very moment you find out you have cancer. If you know, you know. My experience with them as a participant didn't actually occur until years after my diagnosis and treatment, upon one of the handful of occasions when I felt I could have used some support. On this episode, I am joined by Ilene Shiller, social worker and program manager at Wellspring. She meets with clients through the Money Matters program and leads the Returning to Work, Wellness at Work, and Brain Fog programs. She's also involved in their patient and caregiver peer support program and holds a Master's of Social Work from the University of Toronto. This was such a nice chat with Ilene. We received some questions in the arena of money and career as it intersects with this life-altering event called cancer, otherwise known as the Big C. So, one morning, Ilene and I synced up to tackle them together. Hang out with us. Enjoy this episode. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Whereabouts are you right now?
I'm in Toronto on this rainy day. What about you?
I'm also in Toronto. Are you in the office right now or are you at home?
I'm at home working remotely. I do a little bit of both.
That's nice. That's nice that you have the option.
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks so much for joining me this morning. I've been really looking forward to our conversation over the past few days. Money and career is not easy to talk about.
No, absolutely not. Well, it's a topic people don't want to talk about. It's a little bit taboo, but I think the more we can normalize talking about money, the more we can validate people's financial concerns when they're dealing with a cancer diagnosis. I think it's so important.
I think so too. And it's so interesting to me because even those who have not been impacted by cancer, it's not an easy conversation. When you have been impacted by cancer, you're already in a very vulnerable state. As you mentioned, it is kind of taboo. Hoping to change that. One of the reasons why I'm here is because of my personal experiences, but I'm curious to know, are there any experiences that you have that could have led you towards doing the work that you do?
I think I was always sort of drawn to the oncology field. As I started doing a little bit of the work I do in our Money Matters program, it made me realize that first time I heard somebody say, this is stressful, I just never realized that the financial impact would be just as, or maybe even more stressful than the diagnosis itself. And that sort of struck me, that need to have their financial concerns validated and then to be able to sit with them one-on-one, which is what we do in our program. The resources out there aren't perfect, but there are at least some things that can help, that can put the mind at ease a little bit, which you need when you're going through a life-altering journey.
It does require an environment where we feel like our privacy and our confidentiality is taken seriously, right? I do think that when someone experiences this life-altering event, being diagnosed with cancer, these are I statements. These are coming from personal experience, right? I think that rightfully so, people assume and feel that our priority needs to be on getting well, on our health. From my perspective, I was trying to operate and make the assumption that I'm going to make it through this, that there is a life after this. Having some feelings of security around career and finances might help continue to feel hopeful of what that life is after cancer.
Absolutely. I always say, cancer doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have to deal with the experience, but life is still continuing to go on around us. The mortgage and rent payments still have to be paid. We're still dealing with the dynamics of family relationships. I mean, things are still going on around us. And so one of the things that, it helps to address is the ongoing financial impact. Those bills that still have to be paid, those unexpected expenses that come up that, as you probably know, from the first time you parked at the hospital and, as you were leaving, got that, medication not covered by a drug plan, child's care, alternative and complementary therapies. I mean, the list can go on and on about with the expenses you're dealing with, and a drop in income. Most people need to take a break from work and go on a sick leave. And so there's a drop in income. And if their caregiver is taking time off work, that's another financial hit. So it's impactful.
Something that I would like to see more of in the cancer care ecosystem, and that I am seeing some traction in, which I love to see it, is an understanding that recovery from cancer lasts longer than when you're going through treatment. I'm 10 years out. I have the honor of connecting with folks who are a month out, 5 years out, 10 years out, 15, 20 years out. When we say the recovery portion can often last longer than treatment itself, part of that recovery is financial recovery.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that stuff takes time. We all know as adults that it has taken some time to build our careers. So when this life-altering event happens, there's already a learning curve as it is, and that could cause a lot of shifts.
Yeah. It's hard because, people have to take off 6 months or 1 year or longer. And so they feel I'm going to fall behind in my schooling. I'm going to fall behind in my career. It's a matter of giving yourself that time to obviously deal with the treatment, but then post-treatment dealing with the recovery.
What are some patterns or themes with regards to what people really struggle with?
I think it's that combination of the decrease in income and the increase in expenses. The other big issue is the whole return to work decision. Am I ready to return to work? How do I prepare for a return to work? You may be returning to work a very different person.
We're both based out of Toronto, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that when people know and understand that we do have universal health care here, that there's can sometimes be an assumption that everything is covered, right? That
Yes.
what could possibly be the struggles? Could you speak to what some of those additional costs might be that people tend to struggle with that might not be covered?
That's a really good point. We think that when I flip through my benefits booklet at work, I have disability. I know that the government has disability programs. But what happens is those programs, for example, if you have long-term disability through work, it pays typically about 67% of your income. Employment insurance, sickness benefits are 55% of your income, and they have a cap. So those are things that stick out in terms of the income side of things. On the expenses side, you may have drug coverage through work, but maybe it's only 80%. Maybe you're taking a medication that's not going to be covered by your drug plan. So those things come up. Over-the-counter medications aren't going to be covered by a drug plan, aren't going to be covered by the government. So those are things that come up a lot. With drug costs, it's good to know that many of the cancer centers now have drug access navigators or medication reimbursement specialists, and they help people find sources of funding for unexpected drug costs, which is a really, really good resource to have. And then other expenses, transportation, the cost of gas now going back and forth from hospital appointments. If you live far away and you need to stay in a center like Toronto for a few days for treatment, that can be unexpected accommodation costs. Again, the parking is another one. Some people, as I mentioned, seek out alternative or complementary therapies. They're not covered anywhere. So again, there are a lot of things that aren't covered.
I think that there's also more room for people to have a better understanding of all of the costs that can be incurred. You don't really think about these things. There isn't much information out there. I was also blindsided by the additional support that I required. I had to seek out alternative emotional mental support resources that were better suited for me, which can be expensive. A loss of income, and especially as a young person where you might not have reached a certain stage in your life where you are sitting down with a financial planner, thinking about your emergency fund. You might be still paying off student debt. You're trying to save up for a mortgage, or they're just trying to pay rent. Being confronted with the cancer and all of the costs that can come along with it is certainly not at the top of your mind.
Interesting. And a few years back, Young Adult Cancer Canada did their PRIME study. They surveyed around 600 young adults with cancer across the country. And such interesting findings, ringing true with what you just said. Young adults with cancer over 35, 2.5 times more likely to have student loan debt, 1.8 times more likely to have outstanding line of credit debt, 1.4 times more likely to have outstanding credit card balances. Just adds to that burden.
Yep, sounds about right. I feel all of that. There's always room for opportunity. There's always room for progress in a specific area of study in a certain field. And that applies to all areas of study in all industries. What do you wish more people understood about the challenges that exist in this space?
Most importantly, that if they are experiencing the challenges, that they're not alone and that they should be seeking out resources. A very good starting point is going to be the social worker at the hospital. Yes, the government and the workplace benefits, but there are certain community resources out there that can help them with the burden. Canadian Cancer Society has a volunteer driver program, so that can help. It just helps if they can seek them out.
I think that's great. I think that not everyone knows to ask the question, right?
And that's not always easy, And that's why, at least if you can get sort of an entryway into some sort of support system where they're going to, do an intake, do an assessment, see how you're doing, know how to find out how you're, doing from a financial perspective, that helps. So again, that entry point could be the social worker at the hospital. It could be, calling up Wellspring and speaking to a peer support volunteer. Money issues might be, something, hopefully it's uncovered in the conversation and a referral can be made to the Money Matters program. There are resources out there. It's just finding the entry point into them.
Yeah, and there are systems out there like those DART assessments, right? A lot of those surveys that are looking for these specific indicators. Those are meant to assess what your situation is so that someone can analyze your data, can come in and say, hey, we noticed this on your last report. Might you be interested in this type of help? Right?
Exactly. Because sometimes, it's just a big ball of stress and it's, trying to sort of pull the strings apart and find out what's in there. And often finances, might be tangled in there and need to be dealt with.
When it comes to this topic around finances and career, I have found from being involved in the community, even with the questions that I'm really excited to just roll up my sleeves and tag team with you on, right? To try to address them. Sometimes what I find is that people can feel a little bit more comfortable in discussing career things as opposed to finance. I mean, it makes sense, right? It does require a certain level of vulnerability. Career is almost a further removed way of talking about finances.
Agreed. Exactly. There doesn't seem to be as much stigma around it. There's no discomfort in talking about it. It gives you an opportunity for sort of brainstorming and networking and things like that. Yeah, much, much different than pure finance for sure.
When people have these questions around their career plans, I know what they're really asking or what they're seeking is financial security, right? Setting themselves up for success. Right? Well, it is in the subtext there.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of digging, to see what's really going on. And yes, it may be very much a viable, career point, but underneath it's, maybe some sort of financial pressure driving it for sure.
Look, at the end of the day, we all have bills to pay, right?
Yes.
So it is a difficult time economically for everyone. I want to acknowledge that, right?
Yep.
Then there are those that have been directly impacted by cancer. So I think it is on a lot of people's minds right now. And yeah, I think we should just get right into the questions.
Of course.
Let's go there. So
Yeah.
it was very interesting assessing these questions. The questions that I welcome in are all topics, right? Whatever is on people's minds. We have questions around relationships and intimacy. We have questions around the shifts in family dynamics. A ton of questions around career, and we know
Yes.
subtext finance, right?
Yeah.
So let's see how many we can get through today. The whole point is to share different perspectives. I'm hoping that we can share some food for thought for people to consider, right? So let's address someone named Jillian. She is 32 years old in Toronto. She was diagnosed with colon cancer in January, just this year. So it's been under a year. And she says that I found out that I had colon cancer in January. I've gone through many rounds of treatment just as I was diagnosed. I had plans of pursuing a master's in data science and wanting to make a career shift. I'm feeling really behind right now. I don't know when I'm going to be able to pursue this master's. All of this has impacted work, level up in my professional skills, and just focus on anything else, especially in a time when my friends seem to be advancing in their careers. What might be some things that you would recommend?
This I hear often. So Jillian, I hear you, and the first thing to know is you're not alone. That Yak's crime study, it showed that a lot of young adults dealing with cancer miss a significant amount of work and school, and so this issue does come up, and the frustration is really understandable. You got to look at it as right now, while you're in treatment and for the process of recovery. Your job is dealing with your health, and you'll get back on track when you're ready. And when you're ready, I think a really important thing is to find resources that will help you transition back into your schooling and back into your work life, back into your career. A lot of the cancer centers now have sort of rehabilitation programs, which can help you assess readiness and give you some strategies. And then I also tell people if they're concerned and wanting to focus on getting back after or while they're in the process of recovery, try living the life of work, as I call it. So doing things in your day-to-day life that sort of mirror what you would do in your schooling or in your work program, so try a little technical reading. If you're having trouble focusing or concentrating, try drafting some emails or reading longer materials than you're used to. It's absolutely frustrating, but your job right now is focusing on your health. And when you are ready, you will forge forward.
Eileen, I love the suggestion of being in the practice of working.
Live the life of work, not while you're in treatment, give yourself time to focus on that. But when you're in the recovery process and when you're, envisioning a return to work, start doing those little things. We had somebody in our returning to work group who got up, got dressed, and just went out to Tim Hortons in the morning just to get in that habit of getting up out of bed, dressed professionally, and out of the house by 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Ended up heading back home after, but just those things that mimic your responsibilities at work, that mimic what a work day looks like.
I love it. Live the life of working. Now that I reflect back, I definitely did this. So before I got diagnosed, I had belonged to a co-working space. This life bomb happened, and a fellow member had emailed the membership team, shared that I was going through this thing, and they actually offered me free membership for some time so that I could go in there, have a coffee, open up my laptop, operate in a way where I felt very confident in. The work version of Carolyn feels very confident. I loved the work that I did. So to be faced with something in my life that puts me in scenarios that feel very unfamiliar, it was so nice to have this very familiar routine to help ground myself.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say, so you felt your confidence grow from being able to do that. That's amazing.
Only now, when you're bringing up live the life of working, I'm realizing how much of an impact that had on me. And I think especially for Jillian, who is 32 years old, a lot of our identity when we are at that age is connected to work, right? That's what everyone, all of our peers are doing, all of our friends are doing. We're starting to
Yeah.
feel that confidence in ourselves in these professional roles. Something that I might also recommend to Jillian is she mentioned that she had plans of pursuing a master's. This speaks to something that we mentioned earlier of just asking the questions. I might even consider emailing the school, right? Jillian, if you are comfortable in sharing that you are faced with a personal health thing, I wonder if they could defer your application or make some sort of accommodation for you. I would also preface it by saying that, and again, this is coming from me who is 10 years out, that your interests might change, right? As I'm sure you're experiencing yourself firsthand, right? It's a life-altering event. Your interests might change, but if this is something that you do want to get back to once you're feeling well, it might be worth emailing the school to see how they could accommodate that. You never know. There might be ways for you to start working on it in a partial load basis, if that's something that you're interested in. Or if this is a program that you have been accepted to, is there a way where you might not have to reapply when you're ready, should you decide to pursue it later on?
Great
So
suggestions.
ask the questions, right? You never know. They might say no, or there might be options for you. And then I would also say I totally hear you that everyone around you is advancing in their careers. It can feel like you might be a little behind. I would also say that you are learning a great deal about life right now that your peers might not be. And trust me, I'm the last person to say that cancer and things like this are a gift, right? Like I would never gift this to someone else. That being said, um, it often isn't until we experience something life-shattering like this, right, that shakes things up in our lives, in our ether, where we get to learn and discover some of our superpowers, some life competencies. So while you might feel like you could fall a little bit behind in your professional path, know that you are also developing and you have the opportunity to develop some real human skills right now.
It's lived experience, you know, that can translate and give you those skills that will help in any work environment. That's for sure.
Jillian, thanks so much for submitting a question. I think that I can speak for both Eileen and I that we wish you all the very best and you're going to do great. Okay. Keep in touch. Okay. Another question from Jake from Vancouver, 45 years old, diagnosed with testicular cancer at 38 years old. So it's been a few years. He writes and says, as a result of all of my treatments, which he is still foregoing right now, I have random gaps in my career timeline. I feel like I've been out of the game for so long. I've tried to pick up some part-time contracts, but it's been really hard to maintain um focusing full time on work. I feel like I might be approaching a stage where I can start applying to full-time opportunities. But how do I approach communicating these types of gaps that I have with hiring managers? What do you
Um,
think?
First of all, thanks, Jake, for the question. And this is something that comes up quite often. Treatments sometimes will be intermittent, and so there will be opportunities to work here and there. So the first thing is, I think because of COVID and the economy, I think that more and more people have gaps in their resumes nowadays. So it's not an automatic red flag, but I think it's still something that you need to be prepared for. You need to address if you're asked in a job interview. So some people, not all employers like this, but some people use what's called a functional resume. So instead of sort of date and job, it's a highlight of skills and experience. So the top section is really just like an inventory of the type of experience and skills that you have. And then at the bottom, you'll have the employers and maybe how many years or months you were with the employer. So that's one way to sort of get around the gap. But again, if you don't want to do that, you just put it in and you have the gap. If it comes up, particularly at the interview stage, you have to be prepared. And I think it comes down to finding an explanation that you're comfortable with. But bottom line, it's got to be sort of short and simple and authentic. So a lot of people will simply say they were dealing with a health issue that's now been resolved. But the important thing is, after you say that, you've got to swivel the conversation away from that and say, okay, so I was dealing with a health issue that's been resolved. I'm ready to get back into the workforce. And let me tell you a little bit about why I'm such a good fit for this job.
I love that swivel technique. I think it is so great because it allows us to be authentic, right? To be truthful, to be candid, nothing to hide. However, you're playing your part in trying to keep the conversation focused. I have had experiences with this where even though I tried to swivel, and look, every scenario is different, right? Yeah. Everyone's relationship with cancer is different. And what I mean by that is you don't really know what you can trigger in someone else when you bring that up. I have been in scenarios where I have brought up why, I was coming back to work right after some time, tried to swivel the conversation, and they kept on staying on it. I knew where it was going, right? I could see it kind of stumble down. I knew that they were starting to question my readiness. They're like, are you sure you're ready to come back? And I was trying to swivel. I can see them get a little bit uncomfortable with the topic, even though I was trying to swivel it around. So we can certainly play our part. There's always that other side where you're not really sure what it might prompt or trigger within, the other party that you're communicating with, right?
Absolutely, exactly. We can only control what we say and how we try and move the conversation, but ultimately there's another person in the conversation. So I think you just have to be prepared for those difficult conversations.
I do think that as we play a part in creating more awareness on this, perhaps employers, hiring managers could better understand a perspective of someone like myself or Jake. There is a great deal of stigma attached to those who have experienced something like Jake and I have experienced.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's how much you want to bring that lived experience into the conversation.
Yeah, totally. So, Jake, wish you all the best. I've been there, okay? But I do think that swivel technique is great. I do think that the tips offered with regards to different approaches of resume writing is something to consider as well. That actually leads to this next question really well. This speaks to the comfort level that we all individually might have and how much or how little we might want to share. Kelly from Halifax, 30 years old, diagnosed with leukemia just this year in February, going through active treatment. She writes and says, I'm worried about how cancer will impact how potential employers or collaborators will perceive me, but cancer was and is still such a big part of my life. It's a topic that's hard to ignore and not bring up in conversations. How do I live as my full self? Before cancer, I was always open and authentically me. I don't want to quiet myself.
Yep. And I think that shows that this is such a personal decision. And I think that whether to disclose your cancer diagnosis, let's say in a job interview or not, or on a CV or not, just comes down to your own comfort level. You only really need to disclose if there's some part of the duties of the job that you're not going to be able to do because of an ongoing restriction, or you need some sort of accommodation. But otherwise, it really is up to you and your comfort level. And a lot of people don't feel the same way as Kelly, and they're very, very private. They don't want to be viewed differently. They don't want to be treated differently. So they choose to not disclose. But there are others like Kelly who view their cancer experience as really it's a part of being authentic. And, it turns out, like I think, and I've heard experiences of this, that some employers are very receptive to the lived experience. And so I think in this scenario, you use it as an opportunity to highlight what you learned from the experience, the resilience you developed, an opportunity to really think about and focus on your career goals and figure out what you need to do to attain those. It's interesting. In one article I remember reading, somebody actually did a resume where their cancer experience was one of the things on their CV. And so, it would be excellent time management skills from juggling multiple medical appointments, resilience from dealing with multiple competing side effects, things like that. So that to me really showed how much the experience can lend to your career potential.
I think that's great. You mentioned a couple things there that really jumped out at me. It is very important to acknowledge that people operate differently. There are folks that are like Kelly that has felt comfortable in being authentic, right? And right now, only up until this point, struggling with toying with the idea of how that might have to shift, right? Or she's asking herself this question. And then there are some that prefer to be more private. I don't think that one is better than the other. You really have to figure out what works for you. What has contributed to how you define what success in your life is. And that's for nobody else but yourself to define. Not Eileen, not myself. Don't let us tell you what success means, right?
Absolutely.
Success is only for you to define, including your personal approach of how to get there. So I just want to put that out there that there is not one way to operate as a being. That being said, something that was brought up that I want to pull out are the skills that come from experiencing a life event like this. You might find, depending on employers or collaborators that you might be speaking to, for example, a organization that focuses on cancer, that's addressing issues and challenges in that area, it might actually be a strength to bring up that you have personal lived experiences with this. Other organizations, it might not be. It is about, I think, reading the room. And it doesn't have to come at the compromise of your authentic self. It's how to adjust the messaging around it. If it is an organization or if you're communicating and interacting with an individual whom you feel that bringing up cancer is not going to shake and throttle them, right? Like it's not going to, trigger them, then feel free to toy around with bringing up the C word. If you're connecting with an individual and organization where you might not be so sure, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to tuck away your authentic self, but it might be about communicating it in a different way. You can talk about your strengths in time management. You can talk about your strengths in connecting with people, etc. These things that have strengthened from your experience. If later on they might be curious and ask, how did you get so good at this? When you feel that your relationship has reached a certain stage, and if you feel comfortable in sharing, actually, I went through this thing in my life and this really helped me level up in this area. Then you can go there. It's kind of the fine print, right? The subtext. Yeah. Does that make sense? Eileen, do you know what I'm trying? Can you?
Absolutely. And I think you highlighted that everybody has different levels of comfort. And I'm just thinking, going through my head with all the skills, you mentioned, and also, your communication skills, your advocacy skills when you're dealing with the cancer diagnosis. I mean, I think the list goes on and on. And I think that is going to benefit you, in any job, in life in general. So
Kelly, you got this, girl.
Yes.
Okay, you got this. I know that things have just started for you. You know, you were diagnosed in February. I'll be thinking of you and everyone who submitted their questions in their 1 year, right? Hoping that things are exponentially doing better and that all is well. I deeply connect with this question because I have always enjoyed being my full self as well. And if you can find creative ways to be able to operate in the way that has served you well, just might take some shifts and adjustments. I think that we're never going to be able to get away from the fact that we share this space with others, right? We cohabitate this earth with other human beings, right? So being able to read others and adjust is a good skill to have. I think we have time for one other question. Jamie from Toronto, 33 years old, in October 2023. So it's been a year and some change. They found a glioma. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Glioma brain tumor. Says that ever since my diagnosis, my interest in many things has dwindled, including my work. What are some things I can do to get back my motivation in all things life, but specifically work? I feel like I'm losing interest in my field. Jamie was in the legal field, was a practicing lawyer. So feels a bit of dwindling interest in their current field and just life in general.
Yeah, and Jamie, I hear you, and I hear this often when we go through something in our lives that's traumatic, that there are sometimes some positive changes that come from it. It doesn't negate the need to deal with the trauma. Absolutely, that needs to be dealt with, but there's an opportunity in that trauma for growth. And it enables us to ask those really big questions. You know, now that this has happened to me, what do I want to come next? Have my goals changed? Have my priorities changed? People see changes in their relationships. People recognize an increased appreciation of life. They see new strengths, new possibilities. And this is, you know, an opportunity for you to ask yourself, as you are asking yourself, what do I do with this decreased interest in my work? How do I transition into another field? This is something that we see in the career world, and as an opportunity to make a change, to try and transition into something else that might now be of more interest to you. Change is a scary thing. So you might want to start with small steps. You know, maybe there's something different in the legal field that you might be able to do. If you're in a firm, do you want to consider, you know, an in-house position, a community legal clinic, you know, something different than what you've been doing? And in other cases, maybe you want to look at something completely different. A good starting point is just to take an inventory of where your interests and where your skills lie, and then to seek out resources, career counselors, things like that that can help you. Networking to get some ideas, you know, speaking to other people whose careers interest you. So some good starting points for thinking about changes and making changes.
Eileen, I love the practicality that you bring to this question. Jamie, I'm hearing what I'm reading from this question is that there might be elements of what you know of Jamie feeling kind of rocked right now, right? A bit of an identity shift. You mentioned interest in general, which can encompass so much, and also work, right? Being one of it. So I can totally feel all the question marks in this question. I would say that sometimes events like this can make us feel like we're feeling lost or knocked back down a hill. A way to think about this as well is what has been the additional perspective that has been added to your life. And look, I get it. It might not be easy to get here mentally every day, right? I've been there. Sometimes just maybe entertain this for a day. See how this goes. Think about what has been added. What have you gained from this that has allowed you to see more than what you previously were interested in, or whether it was personal or career-wise. It can feel scary. Think about how it might be a little bit exciting as well. Explore, try different things. Are there things that in your past life, pre-cancer, before the big C, that you might have been curious about, but didn't really have the opportunity or time to explore. Maybe this is a time to entertain these areas, right? These parts of you that you felt a little spark but didn't quite get to. So don't pass judgment on yourself. Try different things. I also liked what Eileen brought up with regards to acknowledging your past experiences in the legal field. A mistake that I see some people make is when they're making some sort of a shift, they negate and kind of ignore their past experiences and they take it for granted. You've built your career up until this point, right? Up until 33 years old. You have some experiences in the legal field. Maybe it is a bit of a micro shift. It might not have to be a capital S shift, right? A big pivot. Perhaps it is a small little shift that could satisfy the shift within you in an industry and in a field where you have built a network in, have some experience in, have a level of confidence within. I encourage you to explore both, other areas of interest that you didn't have the opportunity to get to, and also small little shifts as well.
Yeah, I like that focus on it's all about exploring. There's a lot out there. So I think it's a great opportunity to do that. And it's always nice for people if you have a job to go back to. A lot of people like to, okay, go back to the safety and the paycheck, and then you have that opportunity while you're working to just see what's out there, explore.
There was a word that was brought up in Jamie's letter, motivation. What might you want to offer with regards to regaining some motivation and some of the things that perhaps you can touch upon that come up when you work with people?
I think with motivation, the key thing is finding your passion and finding your interest, because the jobs where people are most successful at are the ones where they truly feel interested, they truly feel invested, they truly feel passionate in it. So if that seems to be what's lacking, once we find that, I think the motivation comes a little bit more naturally.
Yeah.
So, again, it's that connection between feeling satisfied and passionate and interested in what we're doing. That's what's going to fuel the motivation to do it.
I know that the word gratitude gets brought up all the time. It kind of gets flung around. It does have some practicality to it, I think, based on my own experiences. I think that focusing on the wins every day, don't judge the size of it. It could even be, I feel great that I was able to get out of bed without assistance this morning. That could be a good foundation point to motivate you for the next day. Hey, I'd love to be able to do that again. Or I was able to do 1 rep of this leg exercise today, and I feel so awesome that I was able to do that. Maybe tomorrow, let's try 2 reps. So even just getting motivation and satisfaction in your muscle memory, tie it to whatever task. It doesn't have to be work related, but getting used to the feeling of feeling satisfied and motivated, I think, can be healthy for us.
We're creatures that like positive reinforcement, right?
Jamie, thanks so much for writing in that question. I think that is a question that comes up a lot. I'm sure Eileen can speak to it. Eileen's nodding right now. So thank you for asking the question. And I hope we offered some things for you to consider and think about. Okay. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
This was great. Thank you, everybody, for sending in such amazing questions.
I feel very honored that I got to be a part of starting your day today. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to share or ask?
Just knowing that if you're experiencing the financial impact of a cancer diagnosis, you're not alone. Try and seek out the resources that are out there. As well, there are resources out there to help you from a work, career, education perspective. There are tough decisions to make, lots of conflicting things you may be feeling about things like a return to work or a change in career, but it's all normal. Again, it's a life-altering experience, and doesn't exist on its own. It exists within your whole world. And so things are going to shift, and it's finding that way that you want to move forward.
Ilene, thanks for being committed to the work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Take care.